Hi everyone, I'm Kim Winter, your host today. I'm the Global CEO of Logistics Executive Group. Thanks for joining us today. And if you haven't already, by all means, go to Logistics Executive TV on YouTube channel and have a look at the other podcasts that we're doing. Today I'm joined by one of Asia Pacific's leading business leadership and team coaching specialists from a company called The Reason in the Road, based in Sydney, Andrew Pepar. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, Kim. Great to join you. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good to see you again. So, Andrew, look, you're a specialist right across the whole leadership and especially around teams space. You work with some of the world's largest organisations, tech companies, logistics, supply chain organisations. You've had an interesting journey yourself. So why don't you give us a bit of a heads up on yourself from your side and a little bit of the journey that's brought you to being one of APAC's preeminent coaches and leadership development specialists?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think for anyone listening to this, it's really, if you're going to learn from someone, it's really important to know their story and where they've come from and what they believe in. And so I'll just sort of take you through some of that. So you can get a picture of the frame of reference upon which I sort of see this work and I see the world. In naming and creating my brand, the idea behind the reason and the road is a fundamental belief that any great company, like there's a lot of businesses in the world, all the way from the small ones to the massive ones. Any great company knows who it is and it has a plan of attack. And that combination of the sort of that right-hand side of the brain, which is the creative purpose and the fundamental DNA of who we are and what we're about, that permeates throughout great companies. And then the clarity of process and structure that enables that to occur, for me, is what I'm aiming to get all of my client teams to the point of. So how I sort of landed on that place myself, sort of personally, I guess was a whole range of things. I was lucky enough, so I grew up in Northern New South Wales in Australia, near a place called Lismore, which is near Byron Bay, and many people internationally would know what that is. And I became really early on, as a child, I became interested in personal development, and to the point where I won an academic prize at school, and the book I asked for was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I remember I'm a complete nerd with that stuff.
Yeah.
And I probably read more now than I do. I read more then than I do now because I've kind of absorbed it all. But I've always been interested in effectiveness, personal growth, and teaching and coaching. And so back then, I was early on, people recognized that, I had a way of creating followers around it. People would listen to me. There's something about the way I communicate or wherever it was that I showed some potential. So they put me on a whole bunch of leadership camps and run by different organizations. And I was exposed to the power of what happens when you change your thinking and you see a different way of how something can be done. And but I didn't do anything about it. Right? I kind of had that experience then. It was kind of school, and it was, I think it was early 90s, and my parents said, no, you've got to go and do something safe, and off you go, and just pick all your really safe conservative subjects and do what you should do. And in the back of my mind was this little seed of, I think that's what I should do. I think I should teach. And the camps I went on, so I ended up being part of these camps where I trained school leaders, and got invited back 3 or 4 years in a row to run some of the parts of it. This is like when I was at uni, like I was 17, 18, 19. And still, I was doing like a business commerce course or something and thinking I was just going to go on a different track to that. And it was kind of a part-time thing I did. And, eventually what I worked out was that that was the thing I enjoyed the most. And, if I could find a way to turn my passion into a vocation, and the work that gave me the most meaning into a way of, and build a business model around that to create a business, then that was going to be the direction that I head in. But I still played it safe. I, after university, got picked up by Deloitte and ended up working in their management consulting area for 4 years, which was amazing because I kind of knew I wanted to head in this direction of coaching businesses, teams, and people. But I didn't start there in Deloitte. I ended up implementing technology systems. I worked a lot in supply chain businesses. I worked in government. I worked in charity, and it gave me this incredible grounding in the way businesses, people, and systems work, and what makes a great business from the nuts and bolts. And while I kind of wasn't growing that seed that was in the back of my mind about what I thought I could do, it actually was an amazing opportunity because it's just given me the grounding that has enabled me to do the work I do in a much more, I think, in a much more aligned way with the clients that I meet. So, and I can add more value. So there was that. And then I worked for sort of two big corporates. And after that, so I made a shift. So I guess the second shift, the first one was having had that experience at school. The second shift for me was then leaving Deloitte, going and working in a couple of big corporates and recognizing that I wasn't ever going to do my best work from within a big company. That like I worked for two of them afterwards, a really big global telco called Verizon, which everyone would know of if they know in the US. And I quickly worked out that I was much better as an influencer, someone coming in from the outside and working from within to create change. And that I worked much better when, in a smaller organization. And so I jumped ship and started working in a few little consultancies, all designed around, behavior and people change.
Okay.
And from there, then around that time I had kids, and it gave me the chance to create my own brand and to work out what work I was going to be known for. And I think that was finally when The Reason the Road was created. I was able to look back on that journey and go, what are the things I really believe in of everything I've taught and coached and all the clients I've come across? And where it's landed me to is I work with founder teams and leadership teams to create absolute alignment and clarity of purpose throughout an organization so that all the energy is focused in one direction. It's not going all sorts of different places. And I also help them work together. So I'm a massive believer in teamwork and alignment. And I see that in sort of teams within big companies, but I see that in small founder teams, is when everything's aligned, that's when the momentum really hits. And it's that combination of The Reason and the Road where, the business can really sing.
Sure.
So there you go, mate. Long answer. But you said before we started, go for it.
Yeah, no.
Right, I'll give him the full story.
Good on you. And look, I've seen you work in operation, and some of the larger corporate coaching clients that we've had in Australia over the years. You'll recall I've brought you in as a specialist to really crack the tough nuts. You might recall one or two in particular in the optical technology field where the executive group was particularly guarded, I would say, in their culture. And we decided we needed to bring in the heavy artillery and brought you in. And it was a lot of fun working with you over those few months.
I had fun too.
The work that you do. That which brings me to the fact that, I think your greatest work that I've seen, and a lot of people have seen, has been face-to-face. Now, of course, in the last few months, we've all been working remotely.
Yep.
I know you guys in Australia are bringing down the borders, or certain states are anyway at the moment, and things are looking pretty good in terms of the pandemic control. But I mean, in terms of working remotely, what does that mean for your business? What have you needed to do? Have you needed to pivot?
So I've completely pivoted my business. So this has been a great, I know there's a lot of people who have lost their jobs. There's a lot of people who have been sick, and it's awful, right? But from a purely business perspective, for me, this has been amazing. So I've wanted to pivot all my coaching programs virtual, either as virtual coaching delivery or online coaching delivery for years. However, it's actually my clients that have resisted that. There's been a culture within companies that, that face-to-face is higher value, and it's the only really way to do it. And so I've never made an investment in the technology platforms I need to mean that, all my programs can be administered and delivered remotely and virtually. But I'm now doing that. And from the moment COVID hit, I shifted all my team coaching work with the leadership teams I work with onto Zoom, which is where I'm now. And all the one-on-one, I don't do a whole lot of one-on-one, but all the group coaching work I do with leaders, the senior leaders, director level people, because we had no choice. They were at home, right? So It was a great chance to sort of test the model. And the results have been amazing. So, I think every one of those teams except one or two have felt like that the work has probably added more value. But from two angles. One is because they're able to see how I work and facilitate and create connection through a virtual environment. So it gives them confidence that they can do the same. And then the second is that their sense is that we're kind of more efficient and focused. We don't waste as much time with the hallway conversations. Now, we also lose something out of that. But I've really pivoted my team coaching work and founder coaching work into lots of short, sharp 1-2 hour sessions, which is working amazingly well. So, before, when we do a whole day developing a strategy or looking at the future, we might do that in a 2-hour chunk one week and a 2-hour chunk the next.
Okay.
And that's working really well.
So tell you, I mean, it's good. What I'm interested in also is maybe if you can share with us the types of challenges or the types of problems that you come up against with your clients and the leadership teams that you're working with, and the type of solutions that you come up with and the programs. And I know you work very ad lib on a lot of. You've got a excellent sort of communication style, as you say. It doesn't surprise me at an early age that you found that people were prepared to listen to you and to follow you because you're very engaging and you've got your own particular style. So what are some of those challenges and problems that you face with clients, and what are some of the techniques that you use? Maybe some case examples from you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think when you think about so I'll talk about two different sectors. I'll talk about the supply chain sector, which is the sector a lot of your clients are listening will be from, but I'll also talk about the startup technology sector. So other than the delivery of my work, the other pivot I've made is I've spent the last sort of 2 months doing 15, 20 interviews with startup digital companies because I want to prioritize and work with those companies, but I also think there's a lot that the bigger companies can learn from the way they operate. So I'll sort of share stories from both of those two sectors. If you think about a leadership team, the reason most of the time someone brings in a coach is because people aren't getting along. Right? Let's be honest. There's conflict between a couple of people. But if I was really honest, being brought in on that brief is usually not the problem. So it's a symptom. The symptom of the relationship being impacted is usually because there's some other more systemic problem in the way, in them not being aligned around their view of the future, in them not being aligned around the way the culture should work, in them not being aligned with, product, service, whatever it is. And those systemic tensions that sit in the background because there's actually not an agreement about the path forward and how things should look, manifest into relationship impacts where people don't get along. Now, don't get me wrong.
Just on that issue, do you find that primarily that those issues come up during coaching on something else, in leadership development on something else, or are you finding that those issues are part of the brief that are provided to you by the CEO or the managing director?
Usually they're provided as part of the brief, but I'll give you an example, which is, I won't talk about the organization or anything, but one of the things that I think I do well is enable people to be comfortable enough to air what they're truly thinking. And so I believe that teams that are honest and transparent with one another, both with problems and with opportunities, where there's that healthy conflict, they're often the ones that go faster. They get further faster because there isn't that kind of artificial harmony, that veneer of everything's okay. So a couple of teams that I've been working with just recently. So a big engineering company. They've actually got a big supply chain part of their business as well. The guy, the CEO, the guy who runs a team, has a dynamic where every single one of their meetings, when there's a tricky subject or a difficult subject, he's the one who has to call it, right? He's the one who has to, talk about it, bring it up, and everyone else sits back. And the impact on the business is that their ability to get closer towards implementing their strategy, which is the future, just doesn't happen because it's all reliant on him. And so that creates increasing frustration for him because he needs the team to share the leadership. So shared leadership is when everyone together takes ownership over that aligned path forward. And so they all step up at the same level to do that. Now, I genuinely think that's rare, but before I talked about those great companies, the ones that are out competing, 5x, 10x the others in the market. And I would say one of the preconditions for them being a great company is that clarity of path forward in that founding or leadership team. And then an equal amount of passion and contribution towards that path forward in those people. And so what we did with this particular team was we had a session, like one of these 1-2 hour sessions. And in the call, one of the guys talked about a problem and then left the call to take a client call. And while he was out, I said to the team, do you accept, are you okay with that? Do you accept that behavior? And everyone was like, no, we don't. And I said, well, so what stops you saying that? And everyone went, it was sort of a moment where everyone recognized the fact that they were hesitating in communicating with one another. And we had a similar moment like that on the same call. And it was just a common recognition of a problem that was holding the team back. And I caught up with the leader again today, and he said he's really noticed a shift in their willingness to step up into calling out behavior, but also calling out business problems. And now some of him's like, can you just tell him to hang back a little bit because it's a bit full on now. But it's actually what he wants, right? He wants shared leadership. He doesn't want to feel alone. He doesn't want to feel like he's the one taking all the responsibility. And there's a couple of practical reasons for that. One is because multiple heads are better than one when it comes to thinking about the future. And the second thing is that you want a succession. It's like, so no CEO wants to feel like they're ever going to be stuck in no CEO is ever going to be in a role forever. And, most of them are being asked now every time they're reviewed, what is your succession plan? So if it's all reliant on you and you're not building the team around you, then that's going to be really hard to have in place.
I've got a number of clients who have struggled a little bit with the remote. I mean, some have done remarkably well, and because we're all assimilating to working remotely in one shape, form, design or another, especially for a lot of multinational clients, they're used to online communication. But we've got a few that have been struggling a little bit with not seeing their staff groups and their leadership teams on a face-to-face basis. What recommendations do you have in terms of technique around communication, given that many companies are still primarily remote? Type of techniques to make sure that the gel is working and that the culture of the organisation is progressing, albeit that everybody's quite remote.
So,
by the way, what are you finding that is working in terms of if they need to change things up a bit? What are those things that you discovered?
Yeah. So I'll just, I told a little bit about my story, but about 10 years ago now, actually my oldest son's 15. So when he was born, so it would be about 14 years ago, you don't get out much when you got a baby, right? So I decided to do a Master's of Education, and it was a global Master's. So I did all my subjects remotely with people in Canada, in South Africa, Sweden, and Australia. It was an amazing experience, but it was way ahead of its time. So we were learning and educating online, doing all that courseware, using tools like Skype and all those things before they were as robust as they are now. And the professor we had, who's a professor of education, wanted us to teach us in two levels. One was the future of the world is going to be, at that point, remember when globalization was massive? Everyone was saying everything's going to be global, right? Which was the buzzword of the time. And they were forward thinking enough to know we're going to have to train a new cohort of people in how to work globally. And so we were kind of the kind of guinea pigs for how the hell is this going to work? And one of the concepts of this was this idea of the tutor in the text. So, and what he meant by that was it was a writing style thing. So that when you're talking to someone remotely, it's different with video, but with email especially, you cannot convey emotion and you cannot give as much instruction. And the clarity of message often gets missed because the format dilutes some of that meaning. And so you have to overcompensate in building the relationship and getting your message through by being able to give them more information and being clearer than you otherwise would. And I think that's been the theme of talking to all my clients, like the sort of leaders of the teams, is they've had to overcompensate on making sure that connections and relationships and the messages that they're getting through to their stakeholders, whether it be the investors, shareholders, staff, all of those different stakeholders they work with, clients, customers, they're having to overcompensate a little bit. And, so the formats they're doing that in is, like I was coaching, the team I talked about the other just before. I coach also one of the biggest technology supply chain businesses in the world, and sort of work with their leadership team in Australia, in New Zealand. And one of the things that they've always talked about is the personal check-in. And I witnessed it with one of the clients I was talking to the other day, where we were in a coaching call, but they were just finishing up a call with a client and said, hey, just hang on a minute. And they'd got a call with a person and they just said, hey, did you just receive the thing that we sent over? We just sent a design over. I was just calling to check that you'd received it, and that was perfectly fine, and it met your requirements. And I don't think it has to be. I think we've got into this cycle where we're doing half an hour Zoom calls with all the team all the time to keep connected. I just think it can just be the little things sometimes, the little phone calls, the little texts, just checking in, just so people are present and aware of, and they're keeping those connections warm between those stakeholders. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. No, that's fine. I'm just really interested to know, what techniques you're using and the sort of different dynamics you're coming across. And, speaking to that, I know that you quite often will facilitate senior company leadership team meetings. And I've seen a bit of that in action, as I said earlier, in relation to a particularly tough bunch of executives that we were dealing with some years ago that I brought you in for. You may recall that. Share with us
you're
a
testing
little.
Me out. How good is this guy?
Exactly.
If you can get these guys over the line, then
you got it worked out. Okay. But it had some interesting moments. We reflect back on the challenge, the really challenging. Try and cast your mind to some really challenging environments that you've come across. Again, what are some of the ways that you have found? And this may play to our audience as well when they're dealing with, as you say, different stakeholders, and it might be clients, and it's challenging to really break down or create that relationship, break down the barriers. What are some of the ways that you believe leaders and senior people, whether they're in supply chain or other industries, can evoke to build those relationships? Because essentially a lot of what you do is about building relationships and enhancing them and taking them across all spectrums. So maybe you can share some of the ideas that you've got around that and what's tended to have worked for you.
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right, Dan. So you think about the leadership team in the center of the organization, and then around it is all those connections to suppliers, to partners, to staff, to peers in other companies, to clients and customers. Running a business, especially a supply chain business, is a complex web of relationships. So your ability to maintain and build and sustain those relationships will determine a lot about your success. It'll make the supply chain more efficient, but it'll just make sure that the work gets done. It's like, it's greasing the wheels of business almost is what relationships do. So a couple of things to think about. The number one rule with relationships is it's not about you. So you think about that group of people we worked with, and who, let's describe them as very technical people. They don't naturally probably prioritize or think about relationships a lot.
Very low EQ.
Very low EQ, thank you. If I made the assumption that I was going to work with them and try and on my terms, which is that to work with them, they had to believe in that staff and that all mattered, then immediately the way I'm going to communicate is from a premise of there's a gap, there's something wrong, there's a problem, there's there's a distance between you and I. And the what's in it, it's not about you idea is that with any audience, they're asking the question of why am I here? And what does this mean to me? And what should I do about it? And so in any communication, I think whether you're running a workshop or a facilitated event or with a written piece of information, if you can answer those key questions really early on, those key questions everyone's got in their mind, and put yourself in the shoes of the audience, I think that's the thing to winning them over and creating followership. And if you can then wrap those messages up in a really nice story, that takes people along from where they are at the moment to where they could potentially get to, you start to shift the relationship. People can see, value in connecting with you, and value in investing in you, value in working for you, and value in keeping connected. So I think that's probably the first rule. And then the only other one would be to choose your channel, right? Choose your channel of communication. So, once you've got that premise of it's not about you, for some people, their preference is to text or to, connect on Zoom. Others, it's phone call. Others, it's, different mediums. And I think that's partly generational, but it's also partly a preference of communication. And I think being aware of that is a good, a really good way to think about the different people that you connected with and how to connect with them into the future.
Okay, no, that's fine, and I guess that sort of goes to the issue also of performance outcomes, and what I'm also interested in finding out from you is if you can share with us sort of some of the ways that your clients are evaluating performance. Is it traditional KPIs that they're using? Has there been much of a difference in the way in the leadership teams that you're dealing with? And I know a lot of the teams that you're dealing with, there's a lot of salespeople involved. There's a lot of people who are responsible for growing businesses.
Yep.
What are you seeing as some of the evaluation methodologies that the companies that you're working with are using currently to evaluate performance? And has that changed over the last few months? Has that stayed reasonably static, or has it changed?
No, I think so. The way I had a brilliant analogy the other day that I think I shared with you when we caught up, but the analogy is this, which is COVID-19 or this pandemic is like you're in a boat in a storm out at sea, right? So there's a big storm going on and everyone's trying to survive, and they're trying to find a way through the storm out to the other side where there's clear blue skies and flat seas again. But the challenge is we're all in different boats. So some of us are in like 60-foot liners, and the equivalent of a 60-foot liner for a business is you're in groceries or the industries that have, you're in Zoom. The industries that have gone gangbusters over this last sort of 3 to 6 months, and some of us are in these small little dinghies. We are in travel or tourism, and the arts. Anything that's highly exposed to getting people together. So I think the thing to recognize about the pandemic is it's differentially impacted people, and I think what that does is create guilt. For people who are, if you're on the wrong side, if you're on the right side, you feel guilty because there's people around you suffering. But if I think get back to your original question, which is performance is relative right now. I still think with the work I do. So what I mean by performance is relative. I think regardless of whether this has created market demand for you or it's created a market loss for you, then I still think the rules around setting focus for your organization for a set period of time on a small number of things that allow everyone to understand what the focus is applies. So I'll give you an example. The organization I was talking about before, they initially were massively impacted by this because most of their workforce was involved in delivering the jobs, and they had to work virtually. They also are involved in delivering billion-dollar contracts, so huge things. And so once it became clear this was a storm, then they knew they had to pivot their expectations. And so what they did was make it a 6-week sprint in their team. And I'm a big believer in kind of, you have a 12-month strategy or a big vision, a kind of 12-month strategy. You have a quarterly theme or a quarterly focus, and then you sort of do 6-week sprints. And they did a 6-week sprint on not building their pipeline with really big jobs, but building with their pipeline with really smaller jobs that were immediate things that they could help people with. And actually what's happened is, because they've got everyone galvanized around that, they're 150% on their target from last year. So they're doing incredibly well. And just because they were able to get them, a large group of people focused on the opportunity, not on the problem.
Okay. So just to maybe wrap up then, what I'd be interested to hear from you about is maybe any quick tips. I mean, a lot of leaders are, under all sorts of stresses and strains, both internally from the organisation, stakeholders, family situations, general environment. What are some of the ways of feeling a bit under pressure, that anxiety come into the influence of decision making? Yeah. What do you think some of the tips are that you could offer in regards to help people maintain that focus, and no matter what role they are in an organisation, anybody in the audience here who's struggling with, whether it's they're zoomed out, they've got Zoom fatigue, or there's so many other influences that are affecting them, or they're struggling to work remotely. What are some of the really quick tips from your perspective to help people maintain focus and their drive?
I think a couple of principles and then some tips with those. I think the first one is that you can't serve others if you can't look after yourself. So I know before I talked about that idea of it's not about you, but that's in your communication. So if you can't, if you don't have the resources within you to inspire, to deliver the message you need to, the first point of call is to look after yourself, whether that's, Zoom fatigue or whatever it is. I think most leaders in the world know right now that caring for their staff and creating balance for their staff is a good thing for business and a good thing for them. So I think if you are having trouble, creating either the balance you need or, with your thinking or whatever it is, I think, obviously you need to seek the help. And part of that might be getting a coach, for your team or your organization, but seek the help you need to be able to get back, to address the problems you need to get back to where you need to be. I think the second one in terms of your motivation is, I think it has thrown a lot of people in terms of their view of the future. I think that's created a lot of loss, and the loss is, I kind of had a dream, and there's a whole lot of assumptions based in that dream that are not going to happen now. And I think we're not the first generation to have gone through that. This is not unique to us. It's happened a lot of times. This is what happens is going to play out over the next 20, 30, 40 years. Like it'll probably pretty much define the century, I'd say. So accept the fact that there is going to be some loss involved in letting go of your perception of what things might have been. But the loss also creates opportunity. It also creates the ability to adapt and see something new. And I think that's the exciting part of it as well, is these little changes are happening, these little micro changes are happening all the time around us all the time. This just happens to be one really big one. And most of us are reasonably good at adapting to the smaller ones. We're just got to get a little bit better at how we adapt to the big one. So I think trying to find what is the evolution, the adaptation, the shifting, the way you need to change, both as a leader in terms of how you work, but also as a business at an organizational level around what markets you play in and who you play with and who you work with and what you provide to them. That can create that motivation and creative juice, I think, even in a really tough time.
So understand your own reality, make sure your context is real. and that that you're not getting lost and distracted on ideas and environments which aren't really going to work for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, well, look, Andrew, I know you got a bunch of kids there to look after. It's probably getting on for dinner time for you.
It's getting there.
Out in the bush. So, look, I really appreciate your time today. Congratulations on the success and for all the work I know you do a lot of work in the community as well. I know that you're always happy to listen to people and to speak to them about any of the challenges that they've got around, whether it be, corporates or small, medium-sized businesses, and give some initial advice to anybody who gets onto your website. So the Reason on the Road will insert contact details down in the comments for this podcast so people can reach out to you. I know you're more than happy to give input.
I mean, if you look at www.thereasonandtheroad, all lowercase.com, if you just go on there and you'll see on my front site, there's a place where you can book a call. And, the first question most people have is with working someone is, are they credible? Can they provide their outcomes I'm after? And you can see there's a bunch of testimonials and stuff on my site. And the second is fit and chemistry. So you would have got some of that kind of from the way I've been talking, and you can see the way I work. But usually on that page, you'll see a button that says booking a quick fit call, and we can just work out whether we're a good fit if there's a problem that you need addressed. Right.
Well, always entertaining and always intriguing and unique product. So well done. Thanks again, Andrew. And to everybody who's joined us today, we respect the fact that your time is valuable. We appreciate you joining us. Again, a shout out to all of the first responders and frontline workers that have been working so hard over the last 3 or 4 months during this pandemic period, to all the people on logistics and supply chain who are working so hard to keep trade moving and business happening. We thank you as well. So thanks again, everybody. Appreciate your time. And Andrew, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you all again. Thanks a lot.